us, for climate change, for the struggle for all kinds of progressive issues. So I'm going to try and lay that out over the next few minutes and then invite your questions. And afterwards, if you'd like, I think there's some books back there and I'll be happy to sign those too. I've been doing a bit of reporting and writing on the Occupy movement, as many people have, and I am the environment correspondent for The Nation magazine, and we have done a lot of coverage of Occupy. And I must say, I think that the Occupy movement is the most hopeful development in American politics in quite a while. Certainly the most hopeful development since that night 3 years ago when Barack Obama was elected president. Many of us in this room were pretty excited that night. 3 years later, it seems clear that that hope that President Obama embodied and talked about has lamentably turned out to be largely a false hope. We can argue about whose fault that is, how much it's his fault, how much it's the Republicans' fault, how much it's our own fault, but there's no denying that his presidency has fallen well short of what he promised, what we expected, and perhaps what he himself expected. One of the interesting things, but not necessarily the most interesting thing about Occupy, the Occupy movement, is that the Occupy movement could well help redeem the failed, false promises of the Obama presidency. And it could do that by creating the political space for Obama to feel impelled to become the president he promised to be as a candidate. And the way that would happen is if the Occupy movement continues to grow and strengthen and becomes the kind of mass-based, relentless political movement that no president can afford to ignore. So that's what I'm going to try and talk about here today. I also think that the Occupy movement could be the best thing that has happened to the climate movement. And I'm going to try and talk a little bit about why that's the case. And what all this implies for the elections next year, the congressional elections and the presidential elections of 2012. I do really think this is a pivotal moment in modern American history. And I'd just like to start by asking how many people here who can hear my voice, please raise your hand if you have visited any of the Occupy sites. All right, look around, look around. That's a lot of you. Now here's the strange thing. For the first time in many of our lifetimes, you find yourself in agreement with the majority of the American people. The Occupy movement is not a fringe movement. It may be populated at the actions by so-called fringe people. But the reason that it is sparking a nerve, and the reason that even the mainstream media is now covering this movement in a fairly visible way, I think the reason for that is that the left has finally started to say something that the majority of the American public agrees with. If you look at the opinion polls, at least 2/3 of the American public agrees with the Occupy movement's position on, for example, should taxes be raised on rich people in order to fund job programs? 2/3 of Americans say yes, right? And down the line. So if this movement can continue to grow in numbers, in diversity, which is still a bit of a challenge for this movement, in humility and in sophistication, I think we really could see a moment that a lot of us have been waiting a long time for. Those of us who've been working in social change, we've waited a long time to find a moment, an opportunity, where you can really shift in a fundamental way the trajectory of the nation. Many of us thought that day had come 3 years ago with Obama's election. We now see, not so simple. Very encouraging, also unexpected. And why this happened is I don't think we really quite know why the media in particular has covered this so much. You know, at first the left was saying, well, the media is ignoring us. They're ignoring Occupy. And that was true in the first couple of weeks, and they were denigrating it and denying it and ridiculing it. And that's still true on Fox, but it's not true about the mainstream media, the rest of the mainstream media now. You cannot make that critique anymore and be honest and accurate. The mainstream media is paying attention to this movement. And one of the things I'm hoping we're going to do at The Nation magazine or any other enterprising reporter, I would really like to see a well-reported piece on why the media is doing that. I don't think we know the answer yet, because the media has ignored so many previous progressive marches, demonstrations, movements of at least, if not larger size. Earlier today on this stage, Tom Hayden spoke. Anybody here at that point for Tom's speech? Gave a great speech in which he talked about the importance of the long-term view and how the end of the Iraq War, Obama's promise, recent promise to get U.S. troops out entirely by the end of this year, was in large part a result of now, 8 years of very patient grassroots work by activists like yourselves. And there were along the way demonstrations of 100,000 people. Mainstream media ignored it. And along comes the Tea Party and there's demonstrations of 200 people, and somehow the mainstream media doesn't ignore that, right? Classic double standard. But with the Occupy movement, something different is happening. The mainstream media is not ignoring it.